What I'd like to do now is get back to modal verbs and to revisit the modal verb structure that we've already built together, especially in level 2. If you remember, we had these slides where first of all we would have our example modal verb such as necesito, and then following that we can put any infinitive that we like plus a variety of different pronouns. So to form a phrase of something like I need to tell her would be necesito decirle. This is the structure that we had. And of course we can switch through 5 modal verbs, the 5 that we have built so far. Another one would be say quiero. So I want to have dinner. Quiero cenar. You can see that this is really a nice fast structure because it reduces the amount of conjugation that you have to do. Unlike in the present tense where we're conjugating all the time, when we use modal verbs, we get to avoid a lot of that work because we're simply taking a modal verb and then adding on any infinitive after that. Another example of a modal verb would be say puedo. So again, we can make up an example sentence. I can't go out tonight. So no puedo salir esta noche. Or tengo que, for I have to. I have to buy it today. Tengo que comprarlo hoy. Tengo que comprarlo hoy. Then finally, we also had voy a as another example of a modal verb. And of course, it works in just the same way. I'm going to dance with her. So voy a bailar con ella. So I wanted to take a minute here just to remind you and to refresh your memory of this vital structure that we have already built with our Spanish. What we've done since then, especially with conjugating in the present tense, is we've added another element into our Spanish, which will allow us to form even more complex sentences and phrases. So if we take an example of verbs such as hablar, comer, or recibir, this verb means to receive, recibir. We learned how to isolate the endings, whether it be AR, ER, or IR, and then play with those endings to get into different angles to conjugate those verbs. So as an example, we could take the verb hablar, and here we have our example endings. O for I, AS for you, and simply an A for he, she, or it. So if you wanted to express I speak, this AR gets replaced by the O and becomes hablo. Or you speak will become hablas. He, she, or it speaks, habla. And again, this will apply the same for the other verb endings, except that with ER verbs, instead of an AS and an A, it changes to an ES. So again, I eat would be como, but you eat would be comes. And that ties in rather well because you have comer ending in ER, so it's natural just to fall into the E. Sorry, let's do this S, comes. Or he, she, or it eats, come. With recibir, it's going to work in the same way as the ER verbs. So recibo would be I receive. You receive, recibes. And he, she, or it receives, recibe. So you can see that we have two main sides. If the verb is ending in AR, these are your options. In both cases, it's O for I, and then we have AS and A. But when you go to verbs that end in either ER or IR, it changes to an ES and an E. So this is the main difference that you have to be aware of when you're conjugating regular verbs in the present tense. My intention now is to try to combine both of these sides together. So on one side we have our modal verbs, the structure that we were looking at before, which works extremely well and is easy to do. Now I want to combine that structure with conjugating inside of the present tense. So this is where we're playing around with the endings and deep diving into verbs, conjugating them. Before finishing this video, let's do a little more live practice. So we'll take some different verbs. Let's begin with cenar. So the first thing we notice is that cenar belongs to the AR group. So, and obviously it means to have dinner. So how would you say she has dinner? So you're going to simply be cena, taking this ending here. What about I have dinner? That would be ceno, taking this ending here. Like this, ceno. And then finally, you have dinner. Cenas. Now these are things that we have not looked at or covered before, but because you learned how to conjugate in the present tense with these endings, and cenar is classified as a regular verb, you were able to predict its behavior because regular verbs follow the rules. Let's try the same thing with an ER verb. So again, this is something that we've not looked at before. The verb is depender, which means to depend. Depender. And as you can see, this belongs to the ER group. So these are our endings for I, you, he, she, and it. How would you say it depends? It's going to be depende. Simply take this ending here, depende, it depends. What about I depend? This one would take this ending here. Again, we remove and replace. Dependo, dependo, I depend. And finally, we have, whoops, change to ER. Finally, we have you depend. How would you say that? That would be dependes. So once again, most of you, I imagine, were able to predict correctly the behavior of this verb and dig down into the different angles to express different points of view. I depend, it depends, you depend, and so forth. Because this is a regular verb, a regular ER verb that follows the rules. Let's take one more example with another regular verb, but this time ending in IR. So again, this is not a verb that we have introduced into the course previously. It means to go up, subir, to climb or to go up, subir. So how would we say you climb or you go up? This will become subes. Let's try another one. I go up or I climb. The sound would be subo, taking the o for I. And then finally, she climbs or she goes up. The sound would be sube. So as you can see, we now have two sides that we can put together. We have this very strong structure of modal verbs, and we also have this ability to conjugate into the present tense with regular verbs. This requires a little bit of extra thinking power because you have to conjugate, and it's normal if it slows your Spanish down a little bit. Next up, what I'd like to do is to get into some sentence practice where we are mixing both of these elements together to create even more sophisticated sentences.